In this talk, we're going to go over the application of high-tech leading ideas to a relatively low-tech business, the Penny Ice Creamery in Santa Cruz, California. Kendra and Zach are our founders. They've known each other for around 12 years, and they periodically keep in touch on professional ideas. In 2008, they have an idea that ultimately turns into what we know as the Penny Ice Creamery, an artisanal ice cream business. Let's talk about how they came up with this idea, vetted it, and refined it. So Kendra has a culinary background. Zach has a business background. Kendra studied at the Culinary Institute, Johnson in Wales. Zach has an MBA from Dominican University in California. Kendra spent time at Tartine, which is a wonderful bakery in the Mission District in San Francisco, and later at Manresa as a dessert chef, which is a restaurant in Los Gatos, California. Zach was at a couple of startups, and then he took a trip to Seattle to visit his sister-in-law who owned an artisanal ice cream business. And this is where Kendra and Zach started to converge on this idea of artisanal ice cream. In late 2008, they went to an organic dairy together. They picked some wild fennel on the way back, and they built their first prototype. This is when they first caught into the idea that there might be a real business here. Even though there are some things that they held as pretty permanent and stayed fast to about the business, the idea of the importance of the artisanal food movement and the organic food movement, they did not say, hey, we love this fennel ice cream, everybody else will love it too. They had a couple of friends that they sort of used to think about the typical buyer for these things, and they built their idea around these potential buyers, these customers, not just themselves. And in fact, later they developed these personas to help them think about and, more importantly, validate those ideas. So their first persona they created was the Epicurean. The Epicurean wants to stay on top of food trends. A user story, which we know has 3 parts, about an Epicurean is, as an Epicurean, I want to experience emerging food trends so that I can do more than just read about them. And the Epicurean is obviously an important early segment. The Downtown Patron. As a patron, I want to enjoy the occasional treat so that I have something extra to look forward to when I'm downtown Santa Cruz, in this case. UCSC student, UC Santa Cruz. As a student, I want to have a local experience so I can commune with other students in our new town. This idea of forging a sense of community with the students who've all been, most of all have been transplanted from somewhere else, was really important, and they adopted the Penny kind of adopted them. A lot of UCSC students work there. And finally, visitors. As a visitor, I want to find local favorites so that I can experience some local texture. Visitor is different in Kendra Zach's mind than a tourist, because a visitor is somebody who comes to Santa Cruz on a semi-regular or cyclical basis. They may have a home here, they may just vacation here, they may have friends here. Something brings them to Santa Cruz periodically. There's quite a lot of these people, and they're important as customers. So how do these different personas fit together in terms of acquiring customers? I think there's an idea, particularly in high tech, that if something's good, it'll go viral. But actually, this isn't always true. In fact, many of the most notable businesses like Facebook that are thought to be these viral successes were actually very closely choreographed. MySpace was, for instance, I don't think very well choreographed. It went out to the market. Hey, people can use this, and look what happened there. It was sort of went flat, and nothing happened to it. The classic idea about customer acquisition in high tech is this idea of the technology adoption life cycle, which was supplemented with this idea of a chasm by a man named Jeff Moore. The idea is you start with innovators and early adopters. These people are inclined to try out new things. They enjoy the novelty, or they have a really, really compelling need for what you have for one reason or another. But between them and the mainstream market, the early majority, there's this chasm, because the early majority, the mainstream buyer, is fundamentally more risk averse and more pragmatic about why they buy things than this early majority. So you may be headed, hey, every month percentage increases are great, and you hit this wall. Well, this is still applicable in high tech and in general in many cases, but a little bit less so, because this was more applicable when high tech was more about big purchase decisions with a long time horizon that required a big commitment, whereas a lot of things today are about a website or an app where your switching costs are not zero, but they're very low. A more flexible idea, heuristic, and one that's probably much more applicable to small businesses at large, is this idea of billiards. And I'm not a great pool player, but the first thing I learned about playing pool, beyond just hitting the ball, was you've got to look at where you leave the cue ball, the white ball that you hit. It's not just about making the shot that you're working on at the moment. It's about leaving the cue ball in a place where you're going to have another good shot, and so on and so forth. And that's a really good way of thinking about this stuff. The Penny, for instance, had the Epicureans as a early lead segment. These folks are influential towards UCSC students and downtown shoppers, the local market at large. And then visitors are going to generally want to look for things that the locals find interesting. They're going to look for the local favorites, so they're kind of one of the last shots. So things that Zach and Kendra realized about the business as they were going through these personas and these ideas of how they were going to build a community around their business were, it's not a mass market business. The in-store experience is really the most important thing, and it's an experiential product. The implications of that are they won't do resale, they want to have people in the store, and that they need to find artisanal staff that can go and they can explain the product the way that it ought to be explained to customers. They have themselves a passion for the product, and we'll talk about how Santa Cruz was uniquely suited to that in many ways in the next module, the regional advantage of Santa Cruz.